download our Revise It Right revision app for hundreds of videos, quizzes, exam questions, tutor support and so much more. This video is about blood vessels. So blood vessels carry blood around the body. They're very, very important. And there are three types of blood vessels that we need to learn about. And that is the arteries, the veins, and capillaries. Now it's really important to note that each of these blood vessels are designed for their function. They have all adapted for their function. But before we talk about that, we need to learn their function. So arteries take blood away from the heart. That is a function of an artery, to take blood away from the heart. And you can remember that by arteries starting with the letter A and away starting with the letter A. So arteries take blood away from the heart. Veins, however, take blood back into the heart. Okay, so the function of the vein is to take blood back into the heart. And again, veins has in it, as we see there, so it takes blood into the heart. That's a good way to remember that. Whereas capillaries, they connect arteries and veins. Okay, that's one thing. And they also deliver the blood to individual cells and tissues in the body. Okay, so they connect arteries and veins and they deliver the blood to the individual cells and the tissues within the body. And that's where then your gas exchange happens, where oxygen can move from the blood into the cells, and carbon dioxide can move from the cells into the blood. Okay, so as I said earlier, each of these are adapted for their function. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to draw out an artery here. Okay, now on this diagram, this bit here is the lumen. Okay, now that's the bit the blood actually travels through. That's the lumen. Okay, so what you can see and what you should notice is that this wall, this is the wall of the artery here, is thick. Okay, so the arteries have really, really thick walls that contain elastic fibre and muscle tissue. So they have thick walls which contain elastic fibre and muscle tissue. Now that's because the arteries are taking blood away from the heart, they're going to have to cope with really, really high pressure. Okay, because they're just coming from the heart. Imagine the heart has got to pump really, really hard to get around the body. The arteries are the first ones to receive this blood, so they're going to be receiving it at really, really high pressure. So they have a thick wall which contains elastic fibre and muscle tissue to really be able to cope with this pressure. And obviously the elastic fibre allows them to stretch and to spring back with the high pressure. And that's what you can see at a pulse when you're checking your pulse. That is a artery expanding and stretching and springing back to deal with the high pressure of blood. Remember to download our Revise It Right revision app, watch over 700 videos, answer 4,000 plus quiz questions, over 1,000 flashcards, 1,000 exam questions, worksheets, forums, and get help from qualified teachers and so much more. The link is in the description. So the veins, on the other hand, take blood back into the heart. So I'm going to draw a vein for you here. Now what you should be able to see, and a big striking difference to be at the start, is actually the lumen is much larger. So it has a larger lumen. And as well as that, it has a much thinner wall. Now veins take blood back into the heart, and by the time that blood gets to the vein, the blood pressure is much, much lower, and therefore they don't need big thick walls of muscle tissue and elastic fibre to cope with that pressure. So because of that, they can have a larger lumen, which means they can carry more blood. Okay, so they have a larger lumen to carry more blood because they don't need the thick wall. However, because the blood is travelling at a much lower pressure, they need to have something called valves. Okay, so I've kind of drawn them there for you. They're valves. Now, if you remember from our video on the heart, if you've watched that, valves prevent backflow. So they prevent backflow. Because blood is in the veins is travelling at such a low pressure, if you tipped upside down, it could force the blood to go backwards, and the valves prevent that. So they open to let the blood through, and then they can close to prevent it from going backwards and ensure that it goes in the correct direction. And then we've got our capillaries, and as we said, these connect arteries in the veins, and they deliver blood to all the individual cells and tissues. Now, if you imagine if they're taking blood to all the individual cells, cells are very, very small. So for our capillaries to be able to fit through those cells to deliver the blood, these also need to be very, very small to weave in and around them. So they really, really are. So I'm going to draw that here to represent how small they are. Okay, we call them 1 cell thick and 1 cell big. Okay, the lumen is tiny, it's only 1 cell big, which means that only 1 cell can fit through at a time. So 1 blood cell, for example, can fit through at a time. So very, very small. Okay, because they have to deliver blood to all the individual cells in the tissues. So that's one adaptation. They're tiny, too small to see. And also another adaptation is that they have really thin walls. Okay, really, really thin walls. Now remember, we always talk about thin walls and we say it's to have a shorter diffusion pathway. And it's the same here. It means that oxygen, when it diffuses into the cell, has much less distance to travel. So it has really thin walls. So they're only 1 cell thick and they have really thin walls. And importantly, these walls are permeable. Okay, you'll remember from a previous video that permeable means they allow substances through them. And obviously our capillaries need to allow substances through them because that's where things diffuse into the cells. So they need to be permeable. So very quickly to summarise, arteries take blood away from the heart and they're adapted by having thick elastic fibre and thick muscle tissues within their walls. Veins take blood into the heart and they're adapted by having a larger lumen to carry more blood, and valves to prevent the backflow. And capillaries connect arteries and veins and deliver blood to the individual cells and tissues. They are adapted by being 1 cell thick to ensure that they can fit around the cells, have really thin walls to ensure a short diffusion pathway, and they are permeable, which means they allow substances in and out. So have a go at answering these questions. If you pause the video, we'll go through the answers after. So pause the video now. Okay, so let's run through these answers. So number 1, what are the 3 types of blood vessel? Well, we have the artery, we have the vein, and we have the capillary. What type of blood vessel carries blood away from the heart? That's the artery. Starts with the letter A, so does away, the artery. Why do the arteries have a thick layer of elastic fibres and muscle tissue? Well, it's to do with the high pressure. Okay, blood coming into the arteries is travelling at really high pressure, so it needs to be able to cope with that high pressure and be able to stretch and return. So that's why the thick muscle tissue and the layer of elastic fibre. What is the pressure like inside the arteries? Well, we've just said it's high. It's high pressure. What do veins have that prevent the backflow? They have the thing called valves, which prevent the backflow. Order the blood vessels from the largest lumen to the smallest. Okay, well, the largest lumen is the vein. The next is the artery. And then obviously with the tiny, tiny lumen at the end, it can only fit 1 cell through at a time, is the capillary. So vein, artery, capillary. What is the benefit of the walls of the capillaries only being 1 cell thick? Well, with everything, when we're talking about thin walls, it's for a shorter diffusion pathway. Why is our circulation system described as a double circulatory system? Well, that was in our video on the heart, and if you haven't seen that, please check that out. But it's because we have 2 circuits or 2 loops of blood, one from the heart to the lungs and back, one to the heart to the body and back. What diffuses from the capillaries into the cells? Well, an obvious one is oxygen. If it was out of, it would be carbon dioxide, but into, it's oxygen. So we have now looked at the 3 blood vessels, their function, i.e. what they do, and their adaptations. Just like always, you can now move on to the quiz and the exam questions to really test yourself on these topics. And if you struggle with any part of this, then please get in contact with one of our tutors and they will happily help you out.